Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. While most preppers would love to live on acreage where they could do things like grow a garden and have a ton of space for their preps, that isn't the case for most of us. Most preppers probably live in small to mid-sized single-family homes, and a lot of us also live in an apartment. And I did for a little while, like when I was in college and for a few years after that. So I know firsthand the struggles that can go along with that if you're someone who's preparedness minded. And if you live in an apartment or other small dwelling, then most of your problems are probably going to stem from two main things: a shortage of usable space and an excess of people living in close proximity to you. And out of those two problems, probably the one that gets the most attention is a lack of usable space. However, you still can prep effectively if you're well organized and you pick up the right kinds of preps. Plastic totes are very useful for organization, but when selecting totes, try to get those that are a solid color rather than transparent. By storing your preps in non-see-through containers, you'll make it much harder for people to see what's inside, which is good from a security standpoint. This will prevent maintenance workers, pest control guys, and managers from being able to see your preps just by walking into your home. Shelving units are another good thing to add, and smaller ones can even fit inside of a closet to keep them out of sight. When it comes to water storage, portable containers like water bricks and military water cans are good options since they have a smaller footprint than other things like aquatainers. I keep this military water can slid in between a small shelving unit and a wall, but you could probably fit a few of those behind like a couch or a large chair. Water bricks could be laid down and stacked one on top of the other or stored upright. Just keep in mind that these could potentially leak. That isn't something that I've experienced, but I think others have. If it's something you're concerned about, you could keep something like this serving tray underneath them if they're stored on shelves like these. And while you should always have as much stored water on hand as possible, storing it in large quantities can still be a challenge, even if you're using low-profile containers. Keeping a few collapsible water containers on hand will allow you to store some additional water if you know a disaster could be heading your way without taking up a lot of space while things are normal. Bathtub bladders like the Aquapod and Water Bob are also good options, and they can store as much water as you can fit in your tub. Using one of those is a much better option than just storing the water in the tub by itself because it'll help protect it from things like germs, chemicals, and bugs. But if you needed to, you could absolutely store water in your tub by itself. Just be sure to treat it or filter it before you drink it. For water filtration, Sawyer filters are nice since they're small and relatively inexpensive. They can remove bacteria, protozoa, and microplastics, but they won't do anything against viruses or chemicals. Grail purifier bottles are a much better option in urban environments where you may have to deal with those sort of contaminants, but the purifier cartridges have a much shorter shelf life at around 65 gallons. Then of course there's other ways that you can purify water, at least from biological contaminants, like you can boil it if you have a reliable cooking method that you can use, and then also chemical treatment methods like water purification tablets or even bleach. Just be aware that bleach does not store for a long period of time. I think the shelf life is somewhere between 6 and 9 months before it starts to lose its effectiveness. Then beyond the obvious of having water stored and the ability to purify more, don't be afraid to get creative when it comes to procuring water for yourself and your loved ones. If you live in an apartment, there's a very good chance that there's other buildings nearby, and if so, you may be able to get water from them by using a Silcock key to operate water spigots on businesses and gas stations. Also know if there's any hot water heaters nearby that you could potentially access. You could also repurpose the plastic totes that you're using to store supplies to collect rainwater when the opportunity arises. Then another item you could use to collect water is 5-gallon buckets, and these are valuable for anyone living in an apartment since they have so many potential uses. In addition to collecting water, they can also be used for other things like a backup toilet. You can either get a pre-made toilet seat designed specifically to fit on a 5-gallon bucket or make a seat out of a pool noodle. Buckets can also be used as a toolbox like this one for general storage or for container gardening. I've been container gardening for a few years now, and if you grow the right varieties of plants, they can produce a good amount of food even if they're in a bucket. And in general, I found that the smaller varieties like cherry tomatoes, jalapenos, and banana peppers work much better for this. And since most apartments have like some sort of like porch or balcony, you should be able to get at least 4 or 5 containers going at once. And being able to grow at least some of your own food would be vital, especially during longer term situations, because storing food in that large of a quantity would be a big challenge because of space restraints. Canned goods are a good option since most of them are ready to use straight out of the can, and any of them that aren't usually only require a small amount of water to be added to them. Another benefit that they have is that they can safely be eaten at room temperature. While there's a lot of them that most people would prefer to heat up, you don't really have to. Then for organizing canned goods, I strongly recommend picking up a can solidator or some other first in, first out can rotation system. These are nice since you can set them up to fit the space that you have in your pantry, and you can also customize them to fit the specific sizes of cans that you're storing. Freeze-dried foods are another good option since they're lightweight and easy to store. Buying them in buckets or number 10 cans will allow you to stack them, but the individual pouches could easily be stored in a duffel bag or in one of your plastic totes. Then another thing that you can use for gardening is an aero garden. These are miniature self-contained aquaponic gardening systems, and they can grow all sorts of things. I use mine for starting seeds towards the end of winter and beginning of spring, but they can also be used to grow small plants. Ones like this would probably work best for growing leafy greens like kale, but you can get larger ones that can grow full-size vegetable plants. Now, those do require power to operate, but they can run even on a small solar generator. You can extend the amount of time that you can keep it running by putting it in a window, turning off the grow light, and then just letting that power station run the pump. And that brings me to the next item that you can use to save space if you're living in an apartment, and that's a small solar generator. Because if you're somebody who's living in an apartment, there's a very good chance that you're not going to need to keep larger things like refrigerators running long term because you probably don't have that much food stored in them. Like maybe somebody who has a full-size box freezer may want to keep that running just because there's so much food in it. A small solar power option like this one can charge most essential devices along with other rechargeable batteries, and one just a little larger can power other things like power tools or just go longer between needing to be recharged. If you need to keep things like medications cool, then a small 12-volt refrigerator freezer like this one could be used for that, since they use much less power than a full-size fridge. Solar panels can be set up inside of a window or on a balcony to recharge your power station, and when you're not using them, they should just slide into a closet or underneath your bed. Cooking in an apartment during a grid down situation would be a challenge, but you do have some options. Many go-to options like butane and propane stoves would probably be no-goes in a lot of places, and in some cases you may not even want your landlord to know that you have them. Alcohol stoves may be a little more doable. They can be stored away pretty much anywhere, and since they can run on isopropyl alcohol, you could store fuel for them without it being obvious that you're storing fuel. However, you do want to use your best judgment when you're using them and also be aware of their limitations. Like most of them, they're only suitable for boiling or heating small amounts of water or food. If you have a solar generator, you could use something like a rice cooker to heat things up, but it will use up a considerable amount of energy, which is a concern if you're using that power option for other things. The next set of challenges that you'll face if you're living in an apartment during a disaster comes from having a large number of people in close proximity to you. These could be security threats from people who are desperate for supplies, diseases that spread in densely populated areas, or simple mistakes that could have disastrous consequences. And when it comes to security, you're probably going to be limited on the types of modifications that you can make to your apartment. And while you don't want to mess up your lease, you still may be able to get away with doing things like switching out the screws in your strike plate and hinges with longer deck screws. And you could also pick up a door barricade bar as well. But if possible, try to keep a large piece of furniture near your door so that if you need to, you can slide it in front of it to make it harder to get into. For sliding glass doors, keeping a dowel rod in the track at the bottom will prevent someone from prying at the lock and just sliding it open. Duct tape can be used to make windows and glass doors a little harder to break, but they are still significant security risks. Because of this, try to get an apartment on an upper level. Doing that will make it a lot harder to move in and out of, but in most cases, it'll force a potential intruder to enter through your front door rather than a window. Then during a disaster, you may not want people knowing that you're there or that you have things like backup lighting. Blackout curtains can work really well for preventing people from seeing light from inside of your home, and then you can also do something like roll up a towel and stick it at the bottom of your door to prevent light from getting out there. If you don't have blackout curtains, you could tape something like a tarp over your window from the inside, so that way, if you have blinds, people from the outside won't be able to tell that you've done that. They'll just see the blinds. Plastic sheeting and tape are also good to have since they can prevent airborne contaminants from getting inside of your home through air vents or leaks around doors and windows. Most of the time when people talk about this, they're thinking about like radioactive fallout. But having those could be useful for other things, like if a train derailment or industrial accident caused a chemical leak. Then a very important part of security that a lot of people overlook is communications. Even if you're not able to talk back and forth with other people, having something like a shortwave radio could allow you to get local, national, and international news if other forms of communications like cell phones go down. Another issue with being in close proximity to a lot of people is that diseases will spread more easily, and the best ways to deal with this are having good stockpiles of hygiene and medical supplies. For hygiene, disinfecting wipes and wet wipes are both nice to have since you'll be able to use them for cleaning without having to dip into your water storage. Disinfecting wipes are good for surfaces like countertops and doorknobs, while wet wipes can be used to clean your hands or wipe yourself down if you can't take a bath. Gloves and respirators are some other items that you may want to pick up. A half-face respirator like this one with P100 filters will be much more effective against biological contaminants than N95s, but if you want more comprehensive protection, then a gas mask with CBRN filters is the way to go. A camp toilet and some heavy-duty trash bags would be important if you needed to deal with human waste in the absence of modern plumbing. You can buy a camp toilet like what I just showed pre-made, or you can make one out of a 5-gallon bucket like I showed earlier. Then another thing to think about is that if water utilities are down for long enough, toilets will start to back up. And in that case, having something like a Nerf ball that you could shove into the bottom of the toilet to plug it up could prevent some of that stuff from coming back up. Now, of course, that is really going to clog it up, so you only want to do that if the situation is really dire. When it comes to medical supplies, an apartment dweller should have plenty of first aid items to deal with injuries, along with medications to deal with common illnesses. So things like bandages, gauze, antiseptics, over-the-counter, pain relievers, stomach medications, and any prescriptions that you may need are all good to have. Then other things like nice warm blankets could help someone recover from an illness or prevent hypothermia. Also, don't overlook the possibility that a simple mistake made by one of your neighbors could have disastrous consequences. If the power goes out, people will naturally start to use things like candles, which could start a fire, especially if they don't have much experience using them. Having a good fire extinguisher could help deal with that, but there's a chance it could already be out of hand by the time you can react to it. So because of that and other circumstances that could force you to leave, it's always a good idea to have an exit plan, and one of the most basic ways to do that is just to have a well-stocked bug-out bag ready to go at all times. This is my bug-out bag. I'm in the process of revamping it, and when I do, I'll show you the whole thing in the next month or so. But of course, there's other things that you'd need to consider if you had to bug out. So if you want to learn more about bugging out and the things that you would want to take with you, then check out this video. Or if you want to see more things that you would need to bug in effectively, then check out this video. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.